Welcome to the Awe and Wonder podcast. I'm Sarah Kinsella,
And I'm Brenda Del Monte.
and in this series, we're talking about neurodivergence in education and in life. And today we're joined by Elizabeth Freund. We're so excited to have Elizabeth join us because not only is she a friend to Brenda, Brenda and Elizabeth have worked together in Arizona, and Elizabeth is very familiar with neurodiversity-affirming practices and has a personal experience to share around that as well. Elizabeth is an SLP. And so, Elizabeth, we're excited to have you here and to hear all about your experiences professionally and personally, if you'd like to.
Yeah, absolutely. I'm so excited to be here. Thank you guys both for having me.
Yeah, thanks for joining.
It's my favorite thing to talk about. So
Great. And before we started recording, for those who are watching the video, you can see Elizabeth's amazing room and chair. Go along with your hair. I just love the whole vibe.
everything is pink all the time. Oh, I was just going to say, often I'm referred to as like that pink lady. So if people don't remember Elizabeth, like just the pink one, yes, that's me.
And for a while we had like the one with the blue hair, the pink hair,
Yeah,
or me.
the blonde one. The blonde one.
I was never like I'm not the exciting one. All right. So I've actually I was trying to think about how long I've known you, but probably over 10 years.
Yeah, yeah.
And so I could answer this, but I would love for you to answer a little bit. Tell us a little bit about yourself, but in the context of learning about neurodiversity and your personal experiences around that, as well as your definition of neurodiversity.
Yeah, as you said, like we've known each other for the whole time I've been doing speech. This is about 10 years. And not far into my practice, there were things that just like I would see in like therapy settings where I'm like, oh, that does, like that doesn't sit right with me. Like, and I had a mom go, oh, well, you should look into the neurodiversity movement. And mind you, this was before there were Instagram accounts. There was nothing out there. And so it was one of those things where I kind of had to do some deep diving to find out. And it was also one of those things that the more that I looked into it and the more that I learned about it and made these shifts in my practice, which, we'll get into a lot of those as we move forward in the conversation. But it was something where I was seeing all those positive impacts as I was changing. But I also started really seeing myself in a lot of what I was learning, particularly as it pertains to what, the spectrum can look like, what ADHD can look like in women versus men in different cultural backgrounds, what that can look like. And so I really started seeing it in myself, and came to understand myself in that way. As autistic ADHD, I also have some OCD at play, which, when we talk about neurodivergence, I guess this is a good time to talk about the definition.
Mhm.
So when we talk about neurodiversity, what we're talking about is actually this really broad umbrella term. So I think currently there's kind of this dialogue where it can really get used as a synonym for autism. It can get used as a synonym for ADHD or to kind of as like a stand-in. But really what we're looking at is a broad umbrella that just covers the many different ways that a brain can be. So when we talk about neurodiversity, we're talking about there's just a lot of ways that your neurology can be, and the same way that some people are tall, some people are short, some people have brown eyes, some people have green eyes. We expect that there is going to be this natural difference across the human experience. And what the neurodiversity movement invites us to do is to look at those differences in neurological functioning as a natural variation in human development, right? And so when we look at it neutrally as a difference versus inherently a problem to fix, inherently an issue to solve, we really bring a different narrative to how we support people, right? And so, neurodiversity, the language of that has been around really since the 90s. It was really popularized by an Australian sociologist by the name of Judy Singer, though there is some There is some differing opinions about where it came from, but she's really the one who kind of brought that term to popularity. But really, what it is asking us to make this shift of not viewing neurodivergence. And again, that could be, ADHD, autism, borderline personality disorder, PTSD, right? All of these are different ways that our brains are functioning. And what that asks us to do when we make that shift is to look at, okay, if I'm not viewing this as a broken neurotypical and I'm viewing this as its own unique system, right? I like to think of it as like Apple versus Windows. Sometimes we can have an overlap, and it's like if I send something from an Apple device to an Android, or I send something from my Mac to a PC, you can see there's this like, and I think it's getting better, right? But it used to be like you would get these documents that had like wingdings, and you're like, what is happening?
Yeah.
And it's not that one person was wrong or broken. They were just working on a different system. And so that's really an analogy that I like to use when coming into this conversation is we're not trying to turn an Apple into a Windows system. We're not trying to turn a Windows system into an Apple system. We're looking at the system we have and where those strengths are, and what the needs are specifically, versus saying like, well, we have to approximate this. This is the right way to be. This is what we're trying to get at, versus how do I support your system in growing and developing and flourishing in a way that doesn't take away or diminish or punish who you are.
I love that analogy. I think that's so relatable. And I could see you, talking with maybe older students and
Mm-hmm.
well, younger ones too. That could really sink in. I'm curious. So you describe yourself as late diagnosed,
Yeah, yeah, late identified, late diagnosed, any of those are fine.
late
Yeah.
identified. So, and you talked about learning about neurodiversity from that mom. I think it's really
Mm-hmm.
came from the mom. Um, so when you were younger, did you notice the things or, reflecting,
Yeah.
what is that like?
So I think one of the ways that it really helped me make sense of a lot of things looking back, right? So there were lots of these little pieces that it's like, this just doesn't track, or like it feels like, this isn't quite right. And so like a big thing that I can think of, um, is a lot of like social interactions and a lot of social cues. Like I could feel like the people around me, like they just understood something
Mm,
about how to interact with others that I didn't seem to be getting. It just always felt like I wasn't quite there. And it just always felt like I really was always trying to copy the people around me or mimic the people around me because I just didn't know, like, socially, like, I don't have the same interests as you. I don't have the same communication style. Like, I'm somebody who I'm either talking all the time or not at all. Like I don't really have a middle ground. And so I also like my social bandwidth is just not the same. It takes a lot of energy for me, particularly when I'm in a multiple person scenario, to be able to be like, how do I navigate this? And so that's a really big one for me, that I look back on. And then I can, I also look back on like, some sensory things where it was just like, oh, you're just being dramatic. You're just being sensitive. You're
mm,
just, right? And I think for me that, one of the biggest takeaways for me is when we shift this perspective and when we shift this language, what we're really doing is helping to take that narrative off of you're just annoying, you're just being difficult, you're just being lazy, you're just being X and Y and Z. Because when we don't help people understand how their brains work, we don't help people understand um, the way that they're interacting and processing with the world, it really does. This narrative comes of like, there's something wrong with you.
mhm.
Right. And I think, when we talk interpersonal relationships, when we talk therapeutic relationships, educational relationships, I don't want to learn from somebody who thinks I'm broken. I don't want to learn from somebody who thinks I'm wrong, And so when we talk about that, and I'm somebody who I'm very neurotypical passing. Like I have a job. I developed my verbal skills very quickly, very early. I tend more hyperverbal. I do things that are very, um, like I love learning. I love doing a deep delve into information. And so that really lends itself to, okay, you're good. Um, but like there's just that like underlying toll. And obviously that's going to look very different
Mhm.
across different brains and different needs, right? Different cultures, different upbringings, all these different things are going to impact it. But I really do think that like the value in understanding the variety of ways that brains can be and that none of them are bad or wrong really does help people to come to a better understanding of themselves and a better relationship with others.
Mhm.
So, what changes did you make as an adult who learned this about yourself? What changes did you make in your own personal environment to feel more comfortable, to match more, almost like I don't have to do this the way everyone's doing it. So I'm going to make these
Yeah.
changes because permission to actually do this the way it feels right for me.
Yeah.
What were those changes?
Well, I really started thinking like, what would I recommend to my clients
Did
if
you
they were
paint,
struggling with
did
this?
you paint your room pink? Is the
I
real
did.
question.
I painted my room pink. No, it's actually we talk about like the unmasking process in our home because my husband's also late identified and so we talk about like when we first got married we had this very millennial beige gray
Mhm.
home where it was like we are the good neurotypical look at our home and now it's filled with things that we find interesting and things that bring us joy like one of the things is like I lean into uh, autistic play and collecting. Like I love to collect squishmallows. I love little trinkets, and so I fill my environment with things that bring me joy without this sense of like you're too old for that. You're not. People aren't going to take you seriously, and ultimately they still may not, right? Like I do still live in a world that does value a neurotypical presentation over one that is not. But I think like it gave me permission to build a space that really met my needs and was really tapped into what genuinely brought me joy. Some other things is I plan for my sensory needs now. When I know that somewhere is going to be really overwhelming for me, I make sure I've got my loops. I make sure that like I always have something to fidget with. Like I'm always moving. And sometimes that can come across as like, oh, she's nervous, she's uncomfortable. And so another big thing that I've started doing is I just share what my needs are. So, like I will, when I email people, I'll be like, hey, I just want to let you know, like, I really struggle with my working memory. I really struggle with timing. Like those are executive function needs that as I've understood myself better, I go, oh, this isn't the same hard for everybody,
Mhm.
And so I've just started really just being forward of like, hey, this is something that's hard for me. You can support me by, or like, please don't hesitate to remind me or ask me questions.
I
Oh, go ahead.
just want to
Please.
share. I love that because it's not easy to say that
No,
to me,
no.
but it's so helpful because like
But
you
it's self-advocacy for
self-advocate.
sure.
When I
Yeah.
was um asking you for like your information or your bio, you did that in the email and said, "Hey, it's okay to remind me." And just that permission is so interesting because I thought, "Oh, okay, well, that it takes like that makes it so easy for me." Like, "Okay,
Right.
I will. Thank you." You know?
Right. Well, because like people can feel like, oh, I don't want to bug her, I don't want to bug her. And so it just to me, it like it takes away that like need to pretend like,
Mhm.
oh, don't make this a big deal. Or like it just is. It just neutrally is. And like I do my things on my end of like I have reminders and honestly the way I do reminders might look different than other people, Like I have to put them specifically where I know I'm going to see them. Because
Mhm.
it's like if you just write a reminder in your phone, well, that's the black box. Everything lives in the black box. Like it just feels like you put it in this bag and it's like I have to like so it was one of those things where I kind of had to play with like, okay, how do I actually do external reminders? How do I actually do
Mhm.
these things in a way that help me in a unique way to my system? And I also think like, when we talk about neurodiversity and all brains being different, just one of those things of like when you normalize, here are my access needs.
Mhm.
Even if you don't have a diagnosis of just like, hey, I get migraines. Is it possible if we turn the lights down or if we meet in a room without fluorescent lights? Like, is it possible to turn off the background music when I'm in there? I have a really hard time processing when music is on. Like I think sometimes we wait for a diagnosis. We wait for a label before we're like, oh yes, accommodations. Oh yes, we can modify this. Um, but ultimately, I think what the neurodiversity movement really does is invites all of us to be like, what do you need to function? Where are you at your best? Like, what supports you in that?
Mhm.
Um, and when things are hard for you, what are your options? And obviously we live in a world with finite resources. We live in a world with finite time. And when we talk about accommodations, that's all very real. But I think like inviting people to share what allows the most engagement and the most rich participation, I think we all benefit from
Mhm.
that?
Mhm. So true.
So, as I've known you professionally through this,
Mhm.
I know that you and I both have had take issue with communication devices because often it is demonstrated as if communication is measurable. And
Mm,
it's also demonstrated through a level of accuracy that requires compliance
hmm.
from all kids, and which is more teaching than test, more testing than teaching. But you and I have often left homes going, if we get this device for them, it's it's not going to be great because
Right.
somebody's going to take their hand and make them touch things and they're going to throw it and break it. They're going to figure out how to break this as soon as possible because
Right. Right.
the amount of control
Mm,
that the therapist or parent or teacher or para or the adult in the room, ABA therapist,
hmm.
whatever, maintains over communication using a technology
Mm.
um, is going to be go against the first do no harm.
Right. Right.
And so I know that you and I've grappled it for years around giving the person the right to communicate when they're non-speaking and need a tool. But will everyone use this in a way
Mm.
that is not only that in a way that's helpful, but is not damaging?
Right. Right. Um, and if there's end to that, I want you to finish that thought, but I've got thoughts already.
No, no, jump in. No, I have more to say, but I have more to into a different question, but jump in here.
Well, I often think like we skip over in supporting non-speaking and like autistic communication in the sense of like, here's this device to fix. Here's how I was talking earlier about like, oh, here's the device to get you closer to what we want you to be. Here's this
Hmm.
device to get here. But a lot of times what ends up happening is like we're then completely dismissing the communication that is happening and where they
Hmm.
are making sense of the world and where they are engaging and being curious and exploratory, right? And
Hmm.
so what that looks like is often leading, pointing, gesturing, sound effects, facial expressions.
Hmm.
And I think that sometimes, with the best of intentions, we bring in this device to add a more accessible, rich opportunity, but we then negate where we're already rooted in that connection,
Hmm.
where we're already rooted, and we say, well, that's no good anymore.
Mhm.
And it's this like, well, we have to get here and we have to do this. And I even think of clients who will receive devices when they are scripting and very echolalic. Other people might know this as like very gestalty, right? And there's different language to talk about it. But I think oftentimes we miss like you have a system in which you're already processing communication. You have a system. And I think sometimes what can happen is we add this device in a sense of like, okay, well, you're doing that, but now we're doing this. And
Mhm.
so rather than anchoring in where they are and anchoring in how they're processing information and how they're making meaning of the world, we come in and we're like, well, you do this now, and there are right words and there are wrong words. And I
Mhm.
think, even with the best of intentions sometimes, and I can speak to myself in therapy, like there has just been a really big mismatch of the language I'm offering versus the language that would really enrich the interaction, right? Like I think sometimes it's so funny to me that we blame autistic people for being rigid when, we go in and they're like, nope, this is the one. Like there's a mismatch of like who gets to be rigid and who doesn't, you know?
Mhm.
And so I think like for me that it's such a shame because like where we have this tool where we could be building and expanding and adding more richness, what we end up doing is like I love this analogy of like rather than anchoring, we're trying to move away from what they're doing. And oftentimes the device can be used as a tool to do that rather than saying, okay, what are we doing here? How do we anchor into that? How do we root into that? How do we use what you're doing now as our roadmap to
Mhm.
really inform how we implement supportive systems? But I want to make sure you get to your question too.
I have
Well, it leads straight into that because what has changed is probably the way you write goals. But
Mhm.
if you're forced to write them at all,
Right.
and and but I know that your approach is we can lip service saying child led,
Hmm.
and yet we show up with a bag of the puzzle, and the child led means you get to pick which piece,
Right.
and that's actually not child led.
Right.
But anyways, so I know you have things to say about what is child led because I've witnessed what it looks like, what child led looks like when you're the therapist. So I do want you to touch on that. And again, we do live in the real world, and they
Yeah.
don't get to go to school and every classroom doesn't get to have 26 child-led
Right.
situations. So
Right.
that's the tough part is in the environments where the way the system is set up, they do have to do some group learning or group
Hmm.
participation or group compliance. That's a tricky thing, and I don't and how do we teach them the tools around some of that, not necessarily to fix them, but to so that they don't miss a learning opportunity.
For
But
sure.
so there's a lot I'm saying here now, but your therapy has changed in being a more initially planned to a lot more curiosity and a lot more creativity and
Mhm.
art and music and anything goes kind of thing. So talk to us about kind of the shifts that you made in therapy and the
Hmm.
effectiveness of that.
Yeah, and I really do want to like tap into what I can do as a one-on-one home-based is so different than what it looks like in a classroom. And like
Mhm.
I anytime I talk about this, I want to be so honest about that because
Mhm.
really the systems that we're up against ask a lot of school teams that oh my gosh, like you're asked to do everything. And, so I do always just like to be really transparent of the situation I'm in is very different. No, I mean, I think I used to be like, we're going to do this and we're going to do this. But I was spending so much time trying to convince a child. I was trying to pull attention versus join attention. And so oftentimes what I do now, there's a concept called strewing. So if I want to bring something new to play with and to explore, I would say I really value therapy that's exploratory in nature, of we're figuring this out together. Ooh, what's going on here? What is this? How does this work? How do these go together? I mean, particularly when we're talking about autism, I think we know that they're really rich and skilled pattern seekers. Their pattern
Mhm.
seeking in autism is extraordinary. And so, as part of that, I think a lot of our learners love to figure out how does this work? What's going on here?
Mhm.
And so, what I'll do with the concept of strewing, and it's very supportive if you have demand avoidant clients as well, or demand avoidant students, is I'll put something out and it's just there and you can engage with it or not engage with it. You get to look at it. I've really removed this like agenda of you have to participate with it in a certain way. Um, we can play with what sounds does it make? We can play with what does it look like when we move it in the light? We can play with what happens, if I have a car track, but instead I want to so say like I have a car track and I want to line up my stuffed animals. What I'm not going to do is be like, no, 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 this is actually for cars. Great, let's line up your stuffed animals, because you know what we can do with lining up? We can do size, we can do same and different, we can describe visual effects, we can talk about the actions. Oh no, he's sliding down. Uh-oh, he's not moving. Like we have these rich communication opportunities that I think like sometimes we can get so like, well, this is what I have planned and this is what I want to target. But when we show up and there's just like no interest in that thing, or they have another plan, well, I can spend my time trying to get them to follow my plan of like, no, 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 this is what I want to do with this. And after we finish this, then we can line up. Or I can lean into the lineup. I can lean into, you're naturally very curious about this. You are naturally very engaged. Like if we think about attention like a magnet, and I have a really strong, like my client is really attuned and attended to this kind of play, or really attuned to this kind of visual or auditory input. And if I'm trying to pull magnetically away, well, that I'm taking all my energy, I'm taking all my strength to do that, rather than saying like, hey, let's lean into that. What are you seeing here? What's interesting to you? And I find when we're exploring, when we're building, when we're creating, there are just a lot of opportunities to model language in a way that's really novel and really rich, and also really well matched to the experience we're having. I think, especially like when we talk about differences in brain functioning and neurological functioning, I think it's also important to talk about differences in how memories are being grouped together and how memories are encoded. And I think when we think about language as part of that like memory package, we have an opportunity to have like really rich, vibrant, expressive episodic memory opportunities, because I am already like, my brain's already lit up. Those synapses are like, they're firing, they're figuring things out. And I have an opportunity to go, okay, like what language am I working on? What language am I working on here? I can say like, okay, like what am I going to fit in here? Is it describing? Is it protesting? Is it, using more verbs? Is it just using more novel utterances? Am I tracking how often? That's what I love to do, because there's not a right answer or a wrong answer. I just want to know, are you trying new things? Like, are you exploring new things? What's happening here? And so it really, to me, leaning into where is your interest already? And to be fair, sometimes I might not be welcome in that activity, right? Sometimes things are just a solo activity, and that's okay. But that's where I might start to be like, well, let me leave this here and let me play with it, right? Let me play with it. And I'm trying to pay attention to, what do you find valuable about that thing you're interested in? Is it the colors? Is it the light? Is it the sound? Is it the movement, right? Like, I think often we get in our heads about like this is the language that should go versus this is the language that could go with this experience. Like I think we have a much bigger opportunity when we lean into, where's your focus already? What are you engaged with already?
Yeah.
You touched briefly on demand avoidant. Just describe that briefly for what that is, in case someone doesn't know what that is, and how you handle that.
Yeah, I love a demand avoidant kid. Possibly because I myself am a bit demand avoidant. Like I love a don't tell me what to do kind of
I
kid,
know
because
you do.
we're fighting the same fight, you know.
So many kids are coming to mind right now.
And we thrive together. So demand avoidance is when something in my environment is perceived as a demand. And sometimes that can even be from the child themselves. Demands can look all kinds of ways. But what happens is, for the demand avoidant child, is there is something kicking on in their system that perceives this as a threat. So I'm going, if you think of like a trauma response, I'm going fight, flight, freeze, fawn, right? So fight, I got kids who I'm smacking, I'm swatting, get out of my face. Freeze, like nothing. We're tapping out, we're going internal. I'm not doing this anymore. Flight, runner track star, right? Like they're out of the room. Fawn is, I think, a really hard one. So, when you have a kid who is so scared of being wrong, who is so scared of disappointing you, that it's always yes, 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 of course, of course, of course. We don't necessarily think of that as being demand avoidant, but when we look at it as a function of, I don't want anyone to be mad at me, I don't want to get this wrong, I don't want to do the wrong thing, we can see that used as a function of, okay, okay, I'll do whatever you tell me. And then we lose that opportunity for something that is really rooted in meaning for that child. We lose that opportunity for something to really know, what's going on in their brain. When we give kids devices, parents are always saying like, I just want to know what they're thinking. I
Hmm.
just want to know what's going on in there. And so I think sometimes when we have that demand avoidance that comes across as like that fawning and that pleasing, that for me is always a really hard one. Um, and so kind of in supporting that and dealing with that, I really do like, and again, we're looking at differences between like one-on-one versus group and always safety, there's always going to be, hey, you can't run into the middle of the street. So sorry. Like, I got to keep you safe. But what I really will do is like, you don't want to do this? Okay. Like, no is always safe for me. No is always a safe choice in therapy because I'm gaining information from that. I'm gaining something about this is not it. They might not be ready for that new information. They might have just had a lot of demands on their schedule. We maybe have had a lot of doctor's appointments. We maybe have had a change in routine. Grandma came and grandma's not as flexible as mom and dad. And, like there can be all these things that come of like, you have to do this, you have to do this, you have to do this. And so for a lot of our kids, it's just this like, I can't do any more demands. Like I just don't have it in my system.
Hmm.
And so when we really embrace the power of no, like I always tell my kids, okay, you don't have to do what I want to do, but what are we doing? And we really put them in the driver's seat of like, okay, apparently what I pick is boring. What I pick is bad. Um, and I love a kid who's going to tell me that real sassy. I really do. But like it really brings this like, okay, like you're in the driver's seat, then what are we doing? What feels important to you? I also, like I talked about earlier, I love strewing. I love just leaving things out for them to find and explore. And I think for so many of our kids who are in therapy for so much of their lives and in always in an environment where there is an expectation of them. There really does become this unspoken, okay, like there is something I have to do to get through this. And there is
Mhm.
there is like a magic thing that like I can say to just make it end, just make it stop. And so, for a kid to be able to be like, no, I don't want to spend my time that way, I think is really powerful for them to get to say, no, no, that's boring. That's silly. That's bad. That's stinky. Like, well, which by the way is more language.
Yeah.
Like
Mhm.
when you're telling me how wrong I am,
Hmm.
Right.
we have so many opportunities there. And so on a lot of times too, that comes with like coaching parents. A lot of parents are like, no, 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 sit down and you have to do your work. And, Miss
Right.
Elizabeth is here and she came to,
Right.
uh, we have to do your work. And so a lot of that comes with supporting parents of like, hey, actually we're here to build independent, autonomous communication skills. And
Hmm.
a big part of that is for kids to say, not that, because that really helps to build, okay, well, what do you want? Like if I know it's not this, cool, let's figure it out together.
Hmm. And I love that it sounds like what you're saying is part of doing that is that whole idea that you were saying you don't come with your exact plan. You are
Yeah.
coming with your goals. You know your goals.
Hmm.
And so then you know how you can adapt to meet your goals based on what the student, the child's interested in.
Hmm.
But
Yeah.
but Elizabeth's goals are never particular words, particular functions, particular MLUs,
Mhm.
particular anything. Functions of language, sure.
Hmm.
Playing with language, choosing
Hmm.
words and experiencing the consequence of that word. So you choose a
Hmm.
word, alligator, and then that means we're doing alligators, at least for a little bit. So it
Right.
matters which one you touch, which one you say, which one you pick.
Hmm.
And the power of language, as
Hmm.
opposed to some of the things that we've seen pretty standard, which is will increase mean length of utterance from,
Hmm.
or will navigate 3 to 4 pages to find this, or whatever.
Right.
And although the navigation one is not a horrible idea, it as long as it's not that happens organically
Hmm.
when they talk about things that are interesting, they can actually navigate really, really far into their device, right?
Oh yeah.
And then
Oh
you almost
yeah.
don't need to write a
K-pop
goal
Demon
'cause-
Hunters is a couple pages in. Guess who's going a couple pages
yes.
in?
Yeah,
You
I
know?
yeah.
mean, you guys, if you want to know, it's 5 hits to vacuum cleaners, and they've already met the goal then. So
Absolutely.
yeah, I think it's funny. We have a mutual kiddo, and she recently strung a whole sentence together about how much Elizabeth talks, and it was hilarious.
She did.
Um,
She said, with a combination of her keyboard and her program buttons, said, "Are you ever quiet?" And I said,
oh,
"No, no, I am not."
I
That is
mean, first of all,
funny.
how amazing is that question? It's not a
Mhm.
pre-programmed thing.
That is
And the fact that the function of language of asking a question at all, which most of our communication device users don't ask questions, and even that kind of a question,
yeah.
are you, right?
Mhm.
And so
Mhm.
she met all the speech goals with that question, but also she met the deeper understanding of she's very aware of the
Mhm.
differences
Mhm.
between the people that come into her home
Yeah.
and the way they interact with her.
And you got a
And
peek into her personality.
oh,
Absolutely.
yep,
Well, and
we already knew she was pretty sassy, but yes.
oh my gosh, she's so funny. And even for me, it was like, oh, she's a kid. I might have to have more auditory rest, right? Like
Mm,
I might have to take breaks because she asked that question. And she's a kid who, if you're being funny, if you're joking, she's gonna laugh along with you. And so
mhm,
that could be something that was otherwise hard for me to track the same way, and by
mhm,
her asking that and like getting that opportunity, it even helps me to go, oh, I might have to change the rate at
Mhm.
which I'm talking. I might have to add more breaks and more rest because it's feeling like a lot for her. And like that's what we want kids to do, is start to realize not that I'm trying to approximate somebody else's communication, but we might have differences in how we communicate and how we process. And how do we collaboratively figure that out?
And that helps her become a self-advocate because you're saying,
Hmm.
gosh, that is such good information that sometimes
Yeah.
if it's too much, then we might have to say, I need you to stop for a minute or
Yeah. Yeah.
well, and the other thing is that the particular client has a visual impairment, has a hearing impairment, and has a trach. And so we have taught her over the years all about her body parts and how she can tell us
Hmm.
if she's going to be sick and all these kind of things. But she's not saying my ears hurt or my eyes hurt
Hmm.
or she even though we've told her how to do all those things because that's not accurate.
That's
Mhm.
not the
It
thing.
that's not the thing. There's another layer here, and that is my sensory system, and I'm
Mm-hmm.
perceiving these things differently
Hmm.
than I perceive when I'm with different people or when you're with different people. So I didn't mean to throw you under the bus that you talk too much, Elizabeth, at all.
But
But
I
I
do.
but again, but no, it was one of those things where it's like her language told us a lot about her sensory system, even
Hmm.
though we already knew there was some dual loss. Also, though, that she is a super sassy person and likes to bring that up because she
Hmm.
also knows that she's being sassy when she
Hmm.
says that, right?
Hmm. Well, and that's like, I think sometimes like that's another place where parents can be like, oh no, don't say that, don't say that, don't say that.
Yeah,
And I'm
yeah,
like, no,
yeah.
please say that, like
Yeah.
you get to be sassy. You get to be, and of course you can have conversations of like, hey, are there other ways we could say that? that was not the conversation I was having. I was just like,
No, yeah.
correct, but like there might be times where you go, hey, we may need to set a social boundary. Like when we're talking to our friends, we do want to be kind, um, but like kids should get to be rude and sassy and snarky and disrespectful, right? Like that is part of the linguistic, especially like as you start coming into like adolescence, when we look at like what is the linguistic work of adolescence. And oftentimes it is that differentiation, it is that separateness, right? And so I think oftentimes like in a more traditional historic model of how we've taught social language is like, well, that's going to make your friends feel bad. That's going to make people uncomfortable. And it's like, well, she was uncomfortable with how much I was talking, like, and I think oftentimes we put this expectation, not just on neurodivergent kids, but, otherwise disabled kids. We put this expectation that they will move through the world in a way that is not expected of neurotypical children.
Exactly.
We expect that 4-year-olds are going to say rude things at grandma's. And we build that into our experience of how we do language and how we model interactions. And so I think oftentimes there's this expectation of like, for this child to be successful, they always have to be polite and regulated and not upset. Oh
And
my God, like,
compliant.
and compliant. And who among us? Like,
Yeah.
if you're not crying sometimes, if you're not mad sometimes, I question, are you engaged? And so
Yeah.
I think oftentimes we have this expectation of you have to behave a certain way. Everybody else gets to do what they want because they don't have a diagnosis. But we have to teach you how to do it the right way. And it really stifles this authentic connection and this authentic development of self, and that's where you see the like, I don't even want to talk to you because
Right.
you don't see me, you don't appreciate me, you don't like me,
Right.
like not offering, but like cultivating these environments where all words are welcome, all communication, not smacking me in the face, right? That's not welcome. But, violence is not welcome, but like, hey, you can sing a song while you point to, oh, McDonald hat. If you've got a little toy farm and that's, well, I'm not going to be like, you didn't say farm,
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Right. Yeah.
like,
You mentioned before a student who has maybe who's a Gestalt language processor and
yeah.
get a new device, and we've left that system and we're moving to
Mm.
a new system. Can you talk about that a little bit more?
Did you have any specific
Well,
questions
I
about
guess
it
what
or?
I'm wondering is, can you kind of get into, I mean, I think it relates, but I wonder because so many
Yeah.
people want to know about like the phrase based and
Mm.
how do you incorporate what their language already is.
That's one of the places that I think we really do a mismatch of how we are processing language and how a device is not an alternative to teaching the right way to do language, right? And so there's a couple of things I have seen with devices of like, well, we have to remove everything that's here, so it's only their phrases. Okay, well, that's a little extreme because how do we grow? How do we expand? How do we gain specificity? How do we gain flexibility in
Hmm.
our utterances without those other words here?
Hmm.
Versus, there's that complete polar opposite end of like, no more scripting. We're getting this device because we don't want any more scripting. Well, there's a lot of meaning and a lot of structure in how that unit of language is functioning for them. And so, when we think about like what can be described as a gestalt, we're hearing more of the like tones and the pitches and the valleys and the mountains, right? I'm hearing um say we have to infinity and beyond, right? I'm hearing that.
Hmm.
And so sometimes I think when we have a device and it goes to infinity and beyond, well, I'm missing that shape, right? And so finding this middle ground where we can put those things in. So say like To infinity and beyond is anytime I'm going somewhere. I'm going to get in the car to infinity and beyond. We're off.
Hmm.
Well, what I could do is then I can put that, like I can put record my voice, right? I could record Buzz Lightyear doing it, and I
Hmm.
could put that in my places, right? I can put it where that function is. I can put it where I'm using it. But what I can start to do then is do to infinity and beyond, or and then we can play with to school and beyond, to grandma's house and beyond. So we can start to play with, I take what this language is. I take how you're already packaging this information, how you're already making sense of it. And I'm building flexibility. I'm building, like I said, specificity into that because scripts tell us a lot, and scripts are really rich in the way that they engage linguistically in the world, in the way that they make sense of an event. But they are not incredibly specific,
Hmm.
right? Like the one thing could be attributed to so many. And so when we take these phrases and we start to embed them in places where they make sense, well, now I can play with them in that context. And sometimes like you don't know, right? Like
Right.
sometimes I'm like, I don't know what the script means for you yet, but I can repeat it back. I can, like I
Mhm.
can kind of play and see. And sometimes I'll make just like a separate page for like my scripts. But I think what ends up happening sometimes is we just pull kids so far away from that without acknowledging the value that is found in that structure and grouping of information and especially like auditorily and tonally, how rich and how important that is. And so I really love to utilize that recorded speech in conjunction with,
Mhm.
right? And in conjunction with the language that's already there, because the goal is independent, flexible grammar, right? Like that's where we want to get.
Mhm.
But we don't do that by wiping where they already have meaning,
Right.
and so we can start to integrate that and think about like, okay, where do we talk about this? Oh, if we have a yummy, 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 I got food in my tummy. Again, just an example. Well, now I can put that, and we could start to yummy, 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 I got pizza in my tummy.
Mhm.
Yummy, 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 I got elephants in my, like we can start to play
Yeah.
with that and learn where I can mix and match.
I love
And
that.
so, I look at it as we're not taking that away. We're using, again, it's that idea of like rooting in where does this make sense for me now? And how do I grow and develop and cultivate a richer expression of that?
So I know that when you have been speaking in groups here in Arizona, you have a couple of handouts that are actual gold. One is PDA, which is the demand avoidant one we talked about. The Gestalt is another one, and I think just general processing is another one.
Mhm. Mhm.
So
Mhm.
would you be willing to share those with our listeners? And if so, we will attach that to this
Yeah.
podcast so that people can click on those, print those, laminate those, post those. They are gold as far as just the language of how to talk about this in respectful ways.
Yeah, absolutely. I'm happy to share.
Before we let you go, we're asking everyone if a listener could leave here with one piece of information from you, what would that be regarding neurodiversity?
So I think it can really be easy to fall into the trap of, oh, neurodiversity is just a new set of vocabulary and a new list of goals for me to write. Like I have to learn these new words. But what I would invite listeners to explore is what narratives do those language changes reflect? And when you think about those narratives, how does your therapy shift? How do your relationships shift when we start to think of the values associated that the impact of that, right? Because it's not just, well, I got to learn more words now. And it can feel that way sometimes, but
Mhm.
but it really is this deeper curiosity based process. It is not an end goal. I don't think that exists, right? Like, I am committed to learning from people who process differently than me, learning from people who experience the world in a different way that I do, and really challenging the narratives that I hold about appropriate or inappropriate ways to function in this world. And so I think if I could say anything, it's just like to use this movement as an invitation to reflect and think about those the narratives we have held, and maybe the ones that we want to foster instead.
I love that.
Awesome.
I love that. You've got me thinking and wanting to do more listening to perspectives from people who are neurodivergent.
Yeah.
This podcast is produced by the Special Education Technology Center, administered by Central Washington University, and funded in part by OSPI. However, the content does not necessarily represent the policy of CWU and OSPI, and you should not assume endorsement by the state government.